Self-sabotage is the reason why you can't achieve any results when it comes to your body. You can't lose the fat, you can't build the muscle, and you might go through these periods where you make pretty good progress towards some of those goals. You know, you might string together 2-3 months of good progress, you lose some fat, you build some muscle, you start liking the way in which you look, but then all of a sudden something happens. It's like a switch goes off, you lose that motivation in which we all seem to rely so heavily on, and eventually we land back to where we were when we started. And this isn't coincidence, this is basic psychology and neuroscience. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to break down why this happens, how we can overcome this cycle, and how when we start to recognize it in the future, we can start to make sure we don't make the same mistakes again. So self-sabotage in of itself is nothing to do with motivation, nothing to do with lack of willpower, but it's essentially the old version of you trying to cling on to the current identity in which it holds. If you really look at what self-sabotage actually means, it's basically trying to sabotage yourself from achieving a different version of yourself. Because what your brain and your mind perceives as threat is anything which is congruent to what it actually is and the identity and what we call the self-concept of yourself, even if it's blocking you from success. And this is where this gets incredibly difficult to master, right? Because your brain is actively stopping you from becoming better. Because your brain, let's face it, doesn't understand good or bad. It doesn't recognize better or worse. It simply understands what it is. And your brain will do everything it can in coherence to get you to stay in line with that current version of you who you actually are, because that's its safe space. So what self-sabotage is you essentially have, I've got my blue pen, I need my green pen, is the current version of you battling with the ideal future version of yourself. And when this current version of you, which we're going to call in psychology the self-concept, this is also known as your identity, this links very closely to your self-esteem, your self-confidence, how you view yourself, the experiences in which you've had in life, everything which makes up who you believe you are at an identity level, on a subconscious level, is completely different to the version of you which you're trying to become. And when your brain senses that you're starting to make progress in getting here, you're starting to get closer, it will start to throw you off. And this manifests itself through several different ways. Maybe it's suddenly you have a dip in motivation. Maybe it's that you're scared of actual success. Maybe you start thinking to yourself, what if this doesn't work? You start doubting yourself. All those doubts is your brain trying to throw and play tricks on you to stop you making that progress, so you end up going back to the version of you which you are. And that is why change is so hard. That is why making a distinctive change in your life, when you're trying to force change, it feels like you're forcing and running against a brick wall, because you quite literally are. And the brick wall is yourself, and all change begins inside of you and how you perceive things. And the brain works in a crazy way, because your brain doesn't perceive reality for what it actually is. It perceives reality through the lens in which your self-concept is viewing it. If you view yourself to be someone fat, you yourself will view the world as someone who believes that they are fat. When you see people walking past looking at you, you're probably thinking, oh, they're looking at me because I'm fat. When you try clothes on, you think, oh, I don't look great in that because I'm fat. And everything in which evolves in the world around outside you links back to that self-concept in which you hold. Right? And if you don't believe me, think about cars. If you've ever gone to look at brand new cars, you've probably gone, oh, I like the look of this car. All of a sudden you see that car everywhere. You're like, why all of a sudden is all that I see Minis or BMWs or Mercedes? And it's nothing to do with the fact there's no more of these cars on the road. All that's happened is your brain is starting to filter these things out. And it works the same way with self-sabotage, because your brain will do everything in which it can to stop you getting closer to the ideal version of you. And that's why sometimes when you're making progress, you're hard on yourself. Oh, I don't see change. And then someone else will say to you, you look like you're making a change. You look like you're changing. And then you're like, oh, maybe I am seeing a difference. Because your brain will do everything it can within its capacity to not see that change, to protect the current narrative in which you hold against yourself. And that is why this process is incredibly difficult. So before we attempt to break this cycle, we need to actually understand how the cycle unfolds, so then we can look at where we can intervene to make a change. So where this happens is we usually have a trigger. And I'm going to use the case of fat loss because this is what we're all working towards. We normally have a trigger, and that trigger may be stress. It may be a bad day. It might be a bad week, right? Your body will have a trigger. And then what happens after you have a trigger is you start overthinking outcomes. You think, oh, I'm stressed. Oh, this means I'm not capable of doing this. You maybe think, oh, I've just had something slightly off track. I've just eaten a meal out. That means I'm going to fail. That means this has all been a waste of time, right? You've probably done this. You've probably had one cheat meal or had 1 or 2 alcoholic beverages, and then this has led to the spiral of you making no progress, right? So you start overthinking the outcomes. You think this has all been a waste of time. I'm a failure. This isn't going to work. This is then seen as that potential failure. When your body senses a potential failure, there's a part of your brain called the amygdala, which activates. Now, the amygdala is very, very small. They're almost like acorn-shaped that sit in the middle of your brain. And the amygdala is responsible for outbursts of emotion. It's almost like the protective base of your brain. It signals fear, panic, anxiety. So this begins to activate. So when this activates, there's a part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is designed for control, right? Your brain, this area of your brain is designed for decision making, to be a critical thinker, to think rationally, to not act out of impulse. Function here drops. You then have a redirection of dopamine. You sense failure. Your body starts to panic. You think, it loses that dopaminergic urge for the goal in which you're trying to chase. It no longer thinks, I don't need to worry about fat loss. I don't need it. But do you know what would be great right now? That cake could be great. I need to go out and drink. I need to go have a bottle of wine. And you then start to find the new surge of dopamine from that quick dopaminergic source, because your body drops that dopamine towards the goal in which you're working for. You think, I'm not going to make any progress, I've ruined it, therefore I might as well go and do this and get a sense of pleasure out of that, because that's what dopamine is for. Dopamine is the neurochemical which is responsible for for pleasure and reward and the avoidance of pain within the body. So you redirect that source of dopamine, and now you start to go into that avoidance behavior. So you start to think, well, there's no point going to the gym. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to go and binge eat on something. I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to pay attention to what. And this avoidance behavior is where the destruction is really happening. And this can happen in an array of cases. Let's say you're focusing on work, something important to you, a project. The same unfolds here, right? Because your trigger is, this is difficult. You might encounter a little bit of stressful or something which requires a deeper level of thinking. You then think, I can't do that, I'm going to fail. Your body starts to stress, you can't think decisively. You then pick up your phone, start doom scrolling. That dopamine is then found there through the avoidance behavior. And then the problem at the end of all this is that then that self-concept, that identity, that part of you which is in alignment with the thing in which you're avoiding is then reinforced. And this is where this becomes a self-perpetuating and self-fulfilling prophecy. Because everything which you do to avoid what you're trying to do then goes back in line to reaffirm that self-concept in which you've currently got. You then fail, and inside you, you believe to yourself, that's normal, I fail, and you feel like a failure. And this is why winners win and losers lose, because a winner keeps winning, and that's reinforced to them time and time and time again. And losers who lose once, they think they're going to lose again and again and again. And the more times in which these patterns play out, whether for the good or the bad, the more in which you actually manifest them within yourself. Because everything you do comes out of conviction. If you believe you're going to win, you're more than likely going to win. If you believe you're going to do something, you will do it. But as soon as those seeds of doubt come in, you're going to manifest that within the result of what you're trying to do. And this is how this process works. And it is basic neuroscience, and this is how you can break down any form of self-sabotage within the body. And this is why you make great progress to getting somewhere. And usually the closer which you get to the goal, the greater in which these triggers come up. And I see it play out. I've worked with thousands of people now, and I see these triggers come up in a multitude of different ways. Avoidance, in terms of binge eating, in terms of even life itself, throwing something stressful at them which they don't manage, and then they use that to reinforce the version of themselves which they're trying to run away from. And they're no longer able to be that ideal future version of them. And it's crazy how this manifests. It's almost like they manifest it externally out of control of them. And every single time it is due to self-sabotage. And everyone has a different way of doing this. Everyone has different levels of self-sabotage. That every single time it could be linked to this process right here. What we're trying to do in an ideal world is stop this process as high up the track as possible, because the further down that we go, the more of a spiral you're going to start to find yourself in, and that's just not who you are. That's neuroscience. You can't beat neuroscience. That's how it works. So ideally, we need to stop this as soon as possible. And the way in which we're going to do this is we're going to learn to regulate our central nervous system, because it's your nervous system which is going to start this process in of itself. And the first place in which we've got to look at is the trigger. The bridge between the gap from trigger to overthinking outcomes, right? And we all do this. We all start to think, oh, what if I fail? What if I lose? What if this happens? During this moment right here, you need to learn to regulate your nervous system and realize, I'm fine. Deep breaths, breathe, relax, journaling about the problem, meditate, anything along those lines that can help you not be in alignment with the emotion which comes with this trigger is going to be beneficial to getting you to where you want to get to. And the greatest way in which you can do this is label how you're feeling. And the reason why I like label how you're feeling is because when you label how you feel, you separate yourself away from the emotion. Now, instead of saying, I'm stressed, say, I am feeling stressed, because when you are something, you are a manifestation of that emotion. When you feel it, you are simply the vessel for it, and it gives you the power to then not act upon that emotion. If you are angry versus you feel angry, even that one subtle difference in the way in which you say it and you recognize it bridges that gap. And all we're looking to do is make this gap as large as possible between trigger and overthinking the outcomes. And then once you realize I'm angry, you can sit there and go, I'm not thinking rationally, therefore I'm not going to start thinking anymore. And you have to stop that to the best of your ability. The next thing in which we can do is start to reframe mistakes. And there's always two ways of looking at things. You can look at things constructively, or you can look at things destructively. And as we all know, there's no point being furtherly destructive. We might as well look at things for what they could be and how they could potentially serve us. Now, in between overthinking outcomes and potential failure, it's more than likely that your trigger is something that didn't go well. Is it that you overate? Is it that you skipped a gym session? Is it that you maybe gained 1 or 2 pounds, right? We then need to start looking, instead of acting upon that and sabotaging ourselves further, is how can we look at that mistake and how can we make a reframe of it? And this is where you will really learn to grow as a human being, because instead of every time you make a mistake, you then beat yourself up for it, we can look at the mistake and learn to reframe it. We can go, okay, that was a great experience. Like, now I know how this makes me feel and I don't need to do that again. And the more times in which you make mistakes, it's only a mistake if you never learn from it. Now, we're never going to be perfect human beings at the end of the day. And expecting yourself to get everything right for the first time is incredibly naive. However, it's only a mistake after you make it again and again and again and again. And that is what we call the definition of madness, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. So what we really want to start doing is reframing it. So when you do mess up or you do get your trigger, you learn to listen to it. And instead of reframing it and going, I've messed up so bad, I can't believe I've done this. You go, I'm only human and I made a mistake and I can learn constructively from this. And that in of itself makes such a big difference, because then you no longer start to take that as potential failure. You just see it as a lesson in which you have to learn. You either make a mistake, you fail, or you learn a lesson. There's no in the middle. The third thing in which we can start to work on is our dopaminergic predictability. And the reason why this is so influential is because whenever you're starting to leaning towards those avoidance behaviors, all your body's doing is looking for a quick release of dopamine. Now, as we know, dopamine is the essential neurotransmitter, neurochemical, which is responsible for the sense of reward within the body. When you do something, it makes you feel good. The reason it makes you feel good is because dopamine is released, right? And if you're chasing a goal and maybe you fail or you make a mistake, you're going to lose that sense of dopamine, and your body's going to do everything it can possible to escape that, whether that be in junk food, logging things off, social media, avoidance of what you're supposed to be doing, skipping the gym, because your body's going to sense that really quick. It's going to go, I don't feel good right now, I need reward, and it will lean into those things which aren't necessarily good for it to replace for the things in which it hasn't currently got. So in order to make something more dopaminergically predictable, we need to start identifying small wins. We need to start seeing every little thing in which you're doing as a small victory, because change is not one big battle. It's multiple small battles which make up a big war. And you're not going to win every single day. But all you need to do is focus on winning that one day at a time, compounding those over the long run. And that's how you're going to get closer to where you want to get to. And just by focusing on winning the day, doing the things, making yourself feel good, just ticking the boxes, you're going to get those small wins, which are going to then lead into your body naturally feeling better about itself. Therefore, you derive more dopamine from that success than you do from the short-term things in which are going to take you away from it, the short-term avoidant behavior. And arguably the most important part of this whole process is going to be rewiring your identity and your self-concept, because everything will always go back to where your identity is reinforced. And we can't avoid this pattern our entire lives. We can only learn to break it a few times. And in order to make this pattern work for us, we need to rewire at the basis of the problem, which is our identity. Because the reason why you're running into self-sabotage is because you truly don't believe you're worth it. And the reason you don't believe you're worth it is because you've probably stacked up a pile of evidence to yourself internally that you can't do what you're trying to do. You can't become that person, or that thing's out of reach. Because you've got to remember, you aren't what you are what you think you are. And whatever you perceive yourself to be, that's going to become a manifestation in your reality. So if we can rewire your identity to the version of you which you're looking to become, this self-sabotage will never become a thing in the first place. Because actually what you're going to do is you're always going to work in accordance with who you are. But if who you think you are is not who you want to be, it's never going to work, right? If you ask a person with a six-pack, are you going to go away and binge eat and be self-destructive? They're not going to be, because that's not in alignment with who they are. If you are someone that's just lost weight, that's really struggling to lose any more, like struggling to lose a few more pounds, is constantly thinking about food, and they've got the identity of someone that's overweight and doesn't have that body of their dreams, they're going to bounce back there as soon as this cycle kicks in. So we need to start to rewire the identity. And the ways in which we can do that are, again, stacking evidence, winning, making ourselves feel good, seeing proof that we are that version of us in which we're trying to become. Speaking out of our self-narrative in which we are looking to assume. Are you using the same neuro-linguistic programming in which the future version of you uses? Are you thinking out of the place of that version of you? If you have a trigger, let's say you have a little bit of shit food and you start thinking of the old version of you, you're then going to be destructive. But if you start thinking the future version of you, you go, yeah, I had a little bit of shit food yesterday, but I'm going to reframe that and use that to fuel my training session today and be stronger and have more energy. The person with the old identity would go, I've ruined it, this is the end of the world, I'm never going to make it. And that's the difference between the two. Because perfect people with the body in which you want and imperfect people that don't have it, there's not a lot in it other than the way in which they view things. And the way in which they view things is down to their identity. So speaking out of the self-narrative of the version of you which you're trying to become. And the final thing is environmental shifts. Does your environment make it conducive for the version of you in which you're trying to become? If you're trying to be someone that is in shape, that takes care of themselves, that has a six-pack, has whatever it is, whatever that dream version of you that you're trying to chase has, is your environment conducive to that? Do you look in your cupboard and there's a load of shit food, but that's not in line with who you're trying to be? Do you look at your plans at the weekend and think that these evolve around me being healthy and happy and not evolve around self-destructive things like drugs and alcohol? Because that's what most people's weekends evolve around. Are your friendship groups people that also have a similar vision to you? And we've all heard this cliche quote that you are the sum of the closest 5 people to you, and that's true because your environment has the greatest knock-on effect to your identity than anything else. And a great example of that is look at where you grow up. Look at who you grew up around. You're very, very similar to the people in which you grew up and spent the most amount of time with because they were part of your environment. And you grow to fit in with your environment. You grow to match your environment because that's who we are as human beings. We're built to fit in. And if we're around the people which are in alignment with what we want, you're naturally going to do everything you can to fit in with those people. And then therefore, as a byproduct, your identity is going to be in line with that. But if they're not, and let's say you're hanging around 5 or 6 people that don't care about health, they go out every weekend, they get absolutely obliterated, you're going to do that because it's very hard to avoid that crowd of people because it's hard to stand out when we are born with that innate desire to fit in. So when you curate your environment to be conducive with this version of you which you're trying to become, it's naturally going to rewire your identity harder. You're naturally going to feel like that person, and therefore you're not going to self-sabotage in the same way in which the old version of you, which you're leaving behind, is going to. Everything comes back to the identity. If you can fix your identity, you can change your self-concept, you can change who you believe you are at your core, this will not happen. And that's why it is the answer to everything. If you want to lose weight, change who you are. If you want to achieve this, change who you are in alignment to the type of person that acquires that thing. But in order to do that, you have to go through this process at least once or twice. You will always run into self-sabotage at some point. Half the time, we're just unconscious to it. And you can't fix a problem unless you bring something that is unconscious conscious, something that's subconscious to that conscious mind to then be aware that you're doing it. Have you ever spoken to someone who doesn't realize that they have a problem and you realize, I can't assist this person? Of course you can't, because they don't even know that it's a problem. If you don't know, you can't fix it. Be aware of your problems. Be aware of what you're doing. If you're not aware, speak to someone that can make you aware of that. And I will help you do that. This is what I do. I help rewire people's identities, help them drive them closer to where they want to get to. I understood that this is the root cause of every problem that everyone was facing when it came to achieving their dream physique. Despite the fact that I worked with people, I changed their nutrition plans, I changed their training program, I did everything. I worked with them. Nothing changed with some people because they didn't change at their core. What we do is we reverse the process. We change who you are. We then put the plans in place. Everything flows downstream. You naturally achieve that because that is in line with who you believe you are. If you want to work with me one-to-one to learn how to do that, apply through the link in my description and I would love to help you. But this is how you do it. This is how we're going to do it. This is how I do it with people in which I work with. I am just the guidance to help you do that and help identify what that is for you. Okay? Much love. Enjoy your day. Over and out.